Hello. Welcome to your session with Dr. Deborah Brown. That's me, and I'm really glad that you're here today. How are you? Well, I'm glad that you're here for this topic today because today we're talking about family. And as I thought about this topic, I thought, well, that sounds kind of boring, right? We're all sick of talking about our families and our trauma and our history and our mom and our dad. It's like that cliche about therapy is that, you lay on the couch and you talk about your mom and you cry. But that's not what this is about today. This is just about you recognizing the power of family in your life and in the way that you are in the world. And we're going to talk about it from the angle of conflict, from discussing what cohesiveness is, and family culture. So the reason that we're doing that is because I want you to begin to understand that within you is everything that you've ever learned. And much of what you learn from your family of origin. And you continue to learn. So what's around you is what's supporting that continued learning. So family is important. Family is the context where everything takes place. So today we're going to talk about the two different versions of family. And the two different versions of family are your family of origin, where you came from, and the family that we create. So when I talk about family, I'm talking about where you came from, your family of origin, but I'm also talking about where you might be right now. So you might say, oh, I live with a roommate or I live with a partner, but I'm not married. I don't have kids. It doesn't matter. Basically, who you live with and who you share your life with is your family, in addition to your family of origin. But these two families work very differently in our psyche and in our development. And I want to talk about the role these play and give you some sort of different ways to look at how you manage these relationships. Because let's face it, some of the biggest struggles that we have sometimes are with people that we're related to or people we've brought into our family. So that's where we are going to go today. So the interesting statistic for the day is that 70 to 80% of people consider their family to be dysfunctional. That's pretty crazy, right? 70 to 80% of people, if you ask them and say, do you have a dysfunctional family? They will say yes. What about you? If I asked you about your family, would it be dysfunctional? So if the answer is yes, then you're in the right place. If you're not sure, that's okay too. And if you are really happy with your family, I still have some strategies today that can help you to make it even better. So let's talk about what makes a family healthy. And there are two elements that I've identified over the years from working with people. And the first one is how you manage conflict. That is absolutely an indicator of family health. And the other one is how do you give positive attention? So think of that as two sides of the same coin. Think about that with your partner, with your parents, with your siblings, with your children. Those two things in the right measure are what make you healthy. So, first one, managing conflict, how you disagree, because you're going to disagree. Everybody disagrees. How you manage that conflict tells me everything about how healthy those relationships are. And positive attention, the other side of the coin, is how do you affirm the people that you are with? And how do you make sure that everybody's needs get met in the family? Not you, but everybody working on that together. So if you look at those two aspects in your family, whether it's your family of origin or your current family, wherever you are you doing conflict correctly? And are you giving enough positive attention? Now, the absence of conflict does not mean that you're doing it correctly. It just might mean you're not speaking up. We're going to get into that in a little bit. So, one type of family shapes the other. I want you to think about this. Your family of origin shapes the way that you have your family now. And as we know, much of who we are and how we are is shaped by where we came from. Our emotional development comes from our family that we grow up in. We learn how to be in the world from our parents. Now, to a lesser degree, as we get a little older, we learn from our peers. We learn in school from friends, but most of our emotional development comes from our family, and a lot of it in the first 2 years. So that's before you even remember, before you even know what's happening. So, a lot of the way that you are in the world, a lot of your emotional regulation, your conflict management, the way you have relationships comes from the first 2 years. Sounds crazy, right? That while you were a baby, you were learning how to manage your emotions. Think of the one simple thing like soothing is self-soothing is what we do as adults. Self-soothing is how do you make yourself feel good when you're sad? Well, if you're good at that, if you have good, healthy ways of taking care of yourself, then you probably had parents that did a good job of soothing you. But if you had parents that didn't attend to your needs, you'll struggle as an adult sometimes to attend to your own needs. So something as simple as that can take place in the first 2 years. If you're left to cry for hours and hours and never really get soothed, you become a cranky baby. You become a baby that isn't peaceful. And then sometimes as an adult, you struggle with the ability to soothe yourself or the ability to count on anyone to really meet your needs. So, a lot of what happens in that family of origin really creates how we face the world and manage our emotions. Also, how we grow into our chosen family when we get older and connect to other people. So when we think about family relationships, the powerful forces in those, primarily the parents, will start there. So a lot of people learned their degree of anger from their parents, for instance. If you grow up in a house where nobody yells, you're probably not going to be a yeller. If you grow up in a house where yelling is normalized, you might normalize that. I had a patient once who was yelling at his wife and just getting angry in her presence. And not even just at her. It would be at the person who didn't hold the door at the store. It would be at the person on the road that cut him off. And his anger was just all present all the time. And she was so stressed from it. And the reason she was so stressed is she grew up in a house of yellers and she had made a decision not to yell in her home. And here she had a partner who yelled all the time. And she couldn't understand why she was so anxious. And as we worked together, we began to realize that every time that yell happened, it triggered an old wound from her family of origin. And I had to help him to understand that what he was doing was hurting her. But then the best part was I got to talk to him and say, "Why do you yell? Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, that's what I grew up in." I said, "Was it okay?" And he said, "Well, I mean, that's just what I know." So think about how closed off that is. This is what I know. It must be right. But it wasn't right. And it was hurting his family. So, what I want you to think about is are there things in you that you're carrying from your family of origin that you didn't like and that now you perpetuate? Yelling is a big one, anger is a big one. I've had multiple women come to me over the years that have said, I yell at my kids too much. And were they? Didn't sound like it was terrible, but to them, they grew up in that and they were fighting very hard not to repeat it. So, family of origin is powerful because it creates fears, it can create good things, but it can also create patterns that you might perpetuate. So, the way that we get past that is we begin to recognize that there might be some trauma and we begin to recognize how we want to live our lives different from what we grew up in. And that can be really hard. I see a lot of people in their 20s going through this realization that their parents are just people. And if you keep your parents in the role of mom and dad or parent and parent, and that they are the all knowing and that they have all the right answers, you're going to find yourself wrong a lot. Generational differences exist, things that your parents liked or didn't like and the way that you live might be completely different. So when you get to a certain age, your parents are no longer the authority on what's right and wrong. You decide that. And I would bet you if you're in your 20s and you're listening to this, that you're probably thinking about how much you're starting to realize that your parents are just people, that they're flawed humans just like you. That's an important realization when you are trying to figure out who you want to be and how you want to be. If we've always modeled ourselves on our parents, that could be really good if they're people that are really good at being in the world. But let's face it, most of us are exposed to dysfunction in other humans. Nobody's perfect. So you kind of have to sort out, what do I like and what am I going to take from my family of origin and what do I not like? And being able to sort that out on your own and realize that parents are flawed, they're not perfect, and they don't have all the answers. The answers are in you. So think about what lessons you learned that you want to keep and the ones that you want to change, because it's an important difference in the way that you become yourself. Is if you have to become yourself to please your parents, you probably aren't going to become who you really want to be. And I've seen that where people go to college for a subject that their parents wanted them to do, or everybody in their family is a doctor, so they go to medical school and they become unfulfilled because they did what they should have done and what the family of origin dictated was correct versus what was inside of them. And it takes us a while to figure that out. I work with people that are in their 40s and their 50s that are still sorting that out. So I just want you thinking about it. I want you thinking about how much of that was great and how much of that is something I don't want for my children. So, how we live happens in the context of family. So, if you think about it, you shaped your behaviors as you grew based on the family that you were in. Now, when we talk about the family we create, I want us to think about, are we shaping our behaviors in the context of the family we're in now? So, the family that we create is the soil from which everything grows. If you are partnered with someone and you are living together, that's the soil from which everything else in your life grows. If you are living in a place with other people, that sometimes is the soil from which everything grows. So think about the power of who you live with. Now, the statistics say that something like 85% of people live with other people. And most of us then are having someone else in our family. And in that family, there is an influence. So, what I'm asking you to think about today is, what is the influence of those people around you? Just like we just talked about your parents influencing you and you having to sort it out. I want you to think about the influence of the people that live in your house and how are you sorting that out? I've even seen people with adult children in their home where they really become affected and shaped by it, and they're the parent. So if you're a parent with adult children in your home, how much are you shaping your life around them? That's great to do when they're little. When your child is 3, your whole life is shaped around them. But when they're 30, shouldn't be so much, should it? So let's think about that. What's the role of those people that live with you? So what I use as a way to explore that is something called family culture. Every family has a culture. Every family has this unwritten sort of set of rules or set of guidelines for how they are in the world. We all have them and we call them values, right? But values are yours individually. Family culture is, what are you sharing in your house? And even if it's just you and a partner, or you and a partner and kids, or whatever configuration, you have a culture underlying your family. So, what I'm saying with that is that if you were to think about culture, you would think of words, words that describe who you are. Now, you could use easy words like Christian or Jewish or Caucasian or Latino, right? You could use all of those easy things that are pretty clear. But I'm talking about different words. I'm talking about words that represent what you believe about the world. And the reason that culture is important is that you have to understand what you believe and is it shared? And if it isn't shared, is that where conflict comes from? And I'll give you an example. If I thought about my words for my family, and this is my family that I live with and the immediate people that are in my family, my words would be kind, honest, positive, grateful, hopeful, and respectful. And you might say, oh, well, those are just the way we should be in the world. I've seen a lot of families that I don't think kind would be their first choice of word. I don't think hopeful represents it for a lot of people, what they are doing. But I use those words as this is where we have to stay. This is our baseline. And things are going to get hard. They're going to go up and down. But I want to return to that as our baseline. So I want you to think about what words would you like to choose for your family culture? What would you like to perpetuate in the way that you live in your house? And maybe the way that your children live in your house, and the way that you and your partner agree on how to do that. This is important because how we make decisions about everything comes from culture. And I'll give you an example. One of the biggest things people have different opinions on it is money. And if you and a partner have different views on money, that's a cultural issue. Your family culture is around what money means. If you're a family who has a culture where we want to have vacations a lot, well, then money saving might be less important with your money, and putting your money away for vacations might be more important. It's not right or wrong, it's just your culture. So money has its own sort of set of values around it. And I always think of it as the $1,000,000 question, right? If you had $1,000,000, what would you do with it? And if you and your partner's answers are wildly different, you might not share the same culture around money. I use the $1,000,000 example as um, what does it mean? What does money mean? And I have couples where one of them would say, if I had $1,000,000, I'd have everything. I'd never worry again. I'd be set for life. I could have the life I wanted. And then the other partner says, that's not enough. We'd have to put that in the bank for later. So if you think about ways of looking at $1,000,000, it'll tell you about your money culture. Now, you don't have to agree 100%, but you have to have a general consensus of how to spend money. And one example was a couple where the woman was buying Starbucks every day. Well, not a big deal. You can go, okay, Starbucks every day. But if you're buying $15 of Starbucks every day, and that adds up over the course of a week and a course of a month, and then meanwhile, the other partner's struggling to pay the electric bill, clearly they're not connected. They're not being cohesive in their culture. So money's a big one. An interesting one I've seen is alcohol. This is one where when you have children, all of a sudden you have to make decisions about things like, what is our feeling about alcohol? And I have one couple where he said, I don't want it in the house. I don't want any alcohol in the house. I don't want the kids to be exposed to it. I don't want alcohol to be normalized because it's not healthy. And the other partner said, well, I want alcohol there because I want it to be normalized. I don't want it to be taboo. I don't want them to go out and see alcohol for the first time and be like, ooh, I want to try this. So their goal was the same. Their values were the same. They wanted to protect their children. But this one issue, they had very different ideas about how it should go. So it's interesting. So if their culture was, we want to protect our children from addictive substances, they were doing it right. But they had to get down to sort of the details of how to do that. So I always think of an example from when I was raising my child. And I remember we used to go to the boardwalk. And here in New Jersey, the boardwalk's a big thing. And you can walk down the boardwalk and see all kinds of exciting things, good and bad. And there was a time when the boardwalk was flooded with people that were likely without homes and likely very, very poor, clearly. And they would set up sort of ragtag instruments, buckets and drumsticks, and all along the boardwalk you could walk and you could hear all of this great music, and it was fun. And I remember taking my son, who was very small, probably 3, 4, 5, and I would give him dollar bills. And as we walked down, we would stop and listen to the music, and then he would walk up and he'd put his dollar in their little bucket. And it gave him such joy because he liked the music and he'd dance, and then he'd give them a dollar and we'd go to the next one. And it was this really fun thing. And I remember my husband at the time, no longer my husband, um, he had a fit about it. Why are you teaching him to give these people money? These people are only going to take that money and they're going to go use it on drugs or alcohol. And my attitude was, I'm teaching him to be generous. I'm teaching him to be kind. And I'm teaching him to see that if he appreciated the music, that he could give. And that maybe that dollar meant more to that person than it did to us in that moment. And I felt like that was important to me to instill that in him. But my husband didn't. And he felt that it was sending the wrong message. Now, we had that conversation behind closed doors, but I think it was clear at some point to my son that we disagreed on that. So, how you model your values to your children is an important part of your culture. And you probably should at least agree or closely agree. And if you don't agree, you don't necessarily put it out there. And what I felt was breeding kindness, my husband felt was breeding something else altogether. And maybe we were both right. I don't know. But the whole point is that you have to understand what your values are to understand how you regulate your behavior and the behavior of those around you and maybe your children too. So our culture is also the message that we give out. It's the message about us as a family. Think about social media. And I know that there are some people who post pictures relentlessly of themselves. Relentlessly. We all have seen it. We all know who they are. You can look on your list and you know who those people are. And my thought is, you've got a family, right? Once in a while, we see a kid or a partner. But if you're at a place with your kid and your partner, why is the picture of you, right? I think sometimes there's a tricky thing where people don't necessarily send the message that family is important, and they don't send it to their family, and they don't send it to the outside world. And then I see other people where they're posting pictures with their grandmom. And I don't know why, but that one warms my heart because grandmom doesn't care about social media. But that person is saying, I value this person. This person is important to me. Let me put that out there. So in that person's culture, they value their grandmom. So think about, what's your culture? What do you value? How do you look at your family in the context of your whole life? One of the lessons I learned very late was about siblings. I am very lucky about the fact that I have four siblings. I have two brothers and two sisters, and we're all born within 9 years. So we're all very close in age. And as we got older, we were very different people and we started to kind of go about our own marriages and our own life. And I started to think about how different I was from them. And I used to think, how can five of us grow up in one spot and be so different, right? And then I started realizing that siblings might grow up in the same house, but they grow up with all kinds of different factors. You have a different personality. You have your parents at a different age. You are born into different situations in the family. And birth order is a thing. Look it up. You can look up the psychological impact of birth order. That's interesting. But I guess what I'm saying is that I can now look at those differences and go, of course we're different. We're different people. But what we share is this connection that is our sort of experience in that family. So I think I would love for you to consider that family might not be people that you choose, but there might be something worth working on connecting to, because there are many people that will come and go in your life, but your siblings will probably, if you work hard enough on it, always be there. So if you're lucky enough to have them, think about, how are you harvesting those relationships? Are you going, oh, we're so different? Or are you realizing you've got a person near you who could be near you for life? And that might be worth working on. So I just wanted to mention that. So I want us to talk now about conflict. Now, family conflict is a fact of life. You are going to have conflict with people that you love. And I hate that. And I hate even saying it, but we need to normalize that. There is no group of people living in a house together that get along all the time. It would be impossible. So if conflict is a fact of life, how we manage conflict determines how healthy our family is. So you didn't probably learn how to manage conflict effectively. Now that sounds like a pretty broad statement, but I've seen people in on my couch for years. And most people that I talk to at some point, we have to have a discussion about how are you dealing with that conflict? Well, if that bothers you, what are you doing about it? That's one of the biggest conversations that I have as a therapist is teaching people to navigate conflict. So I want to think about what conflict navigation did you see in your family of origin? Was it yelling? Was it the silent treatment? Was it people avoiding topics? Was it people dancing around one person to not upset them? If any of that resonates with you, probably you didn't learn a lot of good conflict resolution. I see very few families that kind of tell it like it is in a way that's respectful because you do have a right to speak up and tell it like it is. But family culture says, I'm going to do that in a way that's respectful because respectful should be a part of all of our family culture. So, how do we do conflict? So, the most simple thing that I ever teach people before we talk about any of this is know the difference between discussions and arguments and teach the people around you the difference. A discussion is a debate. It's here is my opinion. Let me listen to yours. Oh, that's your opinion? Let me tell you what I think. What a novel idea, a discussion. A discussion is what we have when two people want to come together and share ideas. Discussions are my favorite. I love discussions. My job is discussions, right? I love that because if I'm in a room with somebody and I disagree with them, I don't yell at them. I hear them. And it's one of the most fascinating parts about my job is I get to hear completely different perspectives than mine. And it's taught me so much. How much can the person that's with you that's different from you teach you when you're not fighting against them? Why do you think it's okay to do it that way? Tell me more about that. That should be a new tagline for you. If you have a partner that you consider difficult and you're struggling to understand them, and they say something completely that feels off base to you, I want you to say, tell me more about that. Instead of, you're wrong, that's stupid, I don't understand, tell me more about that. How generous is that? That in a moment where you're feeling like you just don't get it, that you want to hear more to understand. And I think it's such a powerful thing to say. So keep that one in your pocket. Tell me more about that because we want a discussion to stay a discussion. A discussion is an exchange. I give, I take, I reflect. Now, discussions cross over into arguments, and we all know what an argument is. An argument is that we are both fighting to be heard and we've stopped listening. And I want to say that again. An argument is where you are fighting to be heard and you have stopped listening. So, the way that you can tell a discussion progresses to an argument is that you are no longer hearing what the person's saying and you're trying very hard to be heard. This is why our volume goes up. This is why yelling happens. This is why name calling and frustration and walking out of the room happens, is because we've progressed from discussion to argument. Can you imagine if you could have a talk about a heated subject with somebody without an argument? That's what we call a debate on TV. You're supposed to be able to get your opinions out without anybody yelling at each other or respecting or disrespecting one another. So I want you thinking about that skill in yourself. How are you managing discussions versus arguments? And granted, there are going to be times when it's going to escalate to an argument. but I want you to know how to navigate that argument too. So, some of the dysfunctional things that happen in arguments are that people threaten to leave the house, or they threaten to leave the relationship. And those are two things I want you to be very cautious about. You're with someone and you've included them in your family, or they are in your family, because you care about them and you want to build something. When you threaten to leave the house or the relationship, you immediately instill fear, and you instill a very, very sad feeling in a person that they're not going to be able to process while they're angry. And I see a lot of couples do this where they say, I just should leave. Well, don't say it unless you mean it, because that person is always going to think that you mean it, and they're not going to forget that you said it. Now, can you leave an argument if it gets too heated? Sure. But please don't leave the house, because that causes a whole bunch of fear and completely obscures what you're trying to do in solving a problem. And we do this a lot in couples therapy. We teach people how to walk away. And I think there's a good rule about that, is that if you are really struggling with something and you need to put it to bed, is that the time frame is an hour. And I like that. And I've come to that over many years of going back with couples, is that you can walk away for up to an hour, but you can't leave the house. You can't be out on the road driving and being scared, that, or having a person scared that something will happen to you, or that you're not coming back, or that what are you out there doing? You can go to another part of the house. You can take a deep breath, and it won't take an hour for you to get clarity. It usually happens a lot quicker. And then you come back and say, I'm ready to try again. So think about how you're handling those arguments. The other part of that is yelling. A lot of families yell and they normalize yelling. And we've talked about yelling in other podcast episodes. But I want to just reinforce that yelling is a fear instilling technique. I am yelling at you because I'm not heard. And if I get loud enough, I will force you to listen to me. Family conflict is not resolved by yelling. So let's get rid of that. The other part of yelling is that once one person yells, another person yells, and then another person yells, and then it's a mess. Do not respond in kind to people when they yell at you. When people yell at you, I need you to get still. It's hard. Some of you are not going to do well with that. But if someone ever yelled at me, the last thing I would do is yell back. Because think of this. If we're both in a room and we are both yelling and somebody walks by, we're both off the hook. But if somebody walks by and you're yelling and I'm not, it's pretty clear who might be off right now, who might not be rational right now. So be the rational one, and that helps bring the temperature down. So I want you to think about that. How do you participate in conflict? One of the biggest problems with family conflict is that it's usually loaded. We have a history with that person, with our partner, with our children, with our family. And when we get into conflict, it often brings up resentments from the past. It often brings up things that we have been waiting to say, and we get what I call reactive, right? So, reactive in arguments means that you're just throwing stones at each other. That's really the danger of an argument, is that all you do is just try to hurt each other because you're not heard. So I want you to think, are you being reactive? Is a person poking you and you're jumping? Or are you more operating from the logical mind? Easy to say, hard to do, takes practice. So resentment was a word I brought up before, and I want you to think of resentment as carrying a weight. Think to your family, and I bet if I said to you, tell me what you resent your parents for, there might be a few things that you pop up with. Tell me what you resent your partner for. There's the dangerous one. I fully expect you to resent your parents for something. You don't have to, but I fully expect that most people wish that their parents had done something different, big or small. But to resent your partner, that's different. We can live with resentments of our parents and our siblings because some of that we can't entirely repair or control or even want to. But if we resent our partner or our children or the people in our house, that eventually is going to come to roost in a very nasty way. So think of resentments as this: you have an empty sack on your back, and you're carrying that empty sack through your relationship. And every time that person does something and you don't resolve it and it bothers you, you pick up a rock and you throw it in the pack on your back. And you keep going and you keep going, and there are more rocks in that pack. And then what happens is the pack gets very heavy and you want to be off. You want it off. You don't want to carry it anymore. So the second that an argument comes, you take the stones out of that pack and you throw them at the person. Well, you might have left the dishes unwashed today, but you always do that. And last week you said, and last month you did, and last year I haven't forgotten that. Resentments are stones that we hold to throw at another person. Resentments are actually fertile ground for us to heal. So if you have a resentment about someone that you've been carrying, it's pointing to a part of your relationship you need to work on. So think about that. What do you resent your partner for? What do you maybe resent your children about? It's fertile ground. Take that resentment and examine it by yourself or with your therapist or even with somebody that you trust, and talk about why that resentment is present and why you've held it. And it usually points to something that you need to resolve. And if you don't, you're going to take that stone out of that heavy pack of yours and throw it at them the first thing you get, first moment that you get. Arguments are about one subject. They are not about the whole history of everything. You're allowed to have a small argument. But the problem is that argument can't be the place where everything that ever happened gets dumped. That's a discussion. We need to talk about how we share financial responsibility. That's not an argument. You're not going to yell at each other. You're going to sit and you're going to discuss that. So keep that in mind. And there is a skill that I want to teach you to work on, how you prevent reactiveness in discussions. And it's called active listening. It's a primary skill, and it is the easiest thing in the world to do once you've practiced it. But I'm going to need you to practice it. So, active listening, and we've talked about this before, I believe, in another episode related to couples, but this is good for anybody. Active listening is where you are engaged in a discussion and you are listening to what the other person is saying and just listening. You're not listening to respond. You're not listening with your own junk in your head. You're just hearing their words and you're putting everything else aside. This is why therapy feels so good for people. Because when people come to me, I listen. I really listen to what they say. I'm not waiting for them to shut up so I can talk. I'm not thinking about my own stuff. I'm listening to them. And then I reflect back what I hear. So I hear what you just told me was that you're really upset about what your partner did. We don't get that in a lot of places. Think about the conversations you've had recently. Have you talked to people that have monopolized the conversation or haven't listened to what you're saying or didn't get what you were trying to get across? Active listening is what we do in therapy, but it's what we should do more of in life. I would bet you that more people are of the mind that they're waiting for you to shut up so they can talk. And you know it when you see it. You kind of can tell. So think about not being that person and how much are you actively listening to people. And it can be really interesting because you take people off guard. If a partner came at you and said, I'm really upset and XYZ and you did XYZ and QRS and all these things, and then you went, okay, tell me more about that. You would disarm them because they would be expecting you to come back at them and fight or tell them they're wrong. If you just listen, sometimes a situation diffuses itself. Sometimes people just want to be heard. And sometimes allowing people to talk and you listen without reacting can be the most powerful discussion you've ever had. Because what do we want from people? We want to find out the truth about what's inside of them. We want to make sure we can trust them. The only way we can trust people is to know more about what's inside of them. And how do we get to know that? Is we create a safe space for them to share. So, are you creating a safe space for people to share? And are you getting that from people around you? And is that a part of your family culture? So, what I really like about that conversation is that there are things that you can implement to create this in the place that you live. And some of the easiest strategies of all are just creating space for normal conversations. So think about this. We do it with our kids. A lot of people are real good at this. I have a dad who every single night goes into his kid's room and sits with his child and says, every night for years, says, "Hi, I'm here. You know, we got this time together. How'd your day go? Is there anything you want to talk to me about?" And he does that in one flavor or another, in one expression or another, every single night for this kid's whole life. He's done this. Now, as this child gets older and gets into their teens or gets into things at school, like things that might be tough to navigate, if he's created a space for the child to say that every single night, then he's created a space for that child to have support. So think about that structure that he put into place. He put in this one little thing, this little 5-minute bedtime ritual. And in that, created an emotional space for that child to know that no matter what's happening, he gets that reassurance every night. Now, for those of us who didn't have that dad, think about what that would have felt like for you. Is if you knew somebody checked in with you every night, and if you knew that that person cared about how your day went and was there if you needed to talk about anything, and that you wouldn't have to save anything up and you wouldn't have to resent anything. And if you felt really icky, that you'd be able to say it. And if you were worried about something at school, that you'd be able to talk about it. If somebody had created that space for you, you'd probably be a little more emotionally healthy right now. I didn't have that. I would have loved to have had that. And if I had, I probably wouldn't have had so much inside of me that didn't come out, right? So, what if we got that as an adult? What a fabulous idea. What if somebody cared enough every single day to say, "I'm here. Here's a reminder. I'm here. How you doing? What's inside of you? Anything that needs to come out? Okay. If not today, then tomorrow, because I'm still going to be here." Isn't that the message we all want, right? Security, connection. Why can't you have that right now? So you didn't get it from your family of origin, or you got it differently than that. How about we get it now? One of the things I do with healing with people is helping them to understand what healing really means. And what healing really means is that you give yourself the things that you need in order to be the best version of yourself. Now, some of you may not need that level of diligence. You may not need somebody to check in on you every night. You may not need somebody at this age to be tucking you into bed, or you might. But what you might need is somebody who comes home every night and just says, "How was your day?" I can tell you that question changed my life. In my current relationship, I have someone who every single day says, "Tell me about your day and tell me about what you're going to do tomorrow." That was groundbreaking to me. I never had that. And I never understood how powerful that was. Now, if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have been, "That's annoying." I would have thought, "I don't need that." But now that I have it, the idea of someone else witnessing your life every day and participating and being invested in it is so powerful. Are you doing that for people around you at the level that they need? And are you getting that? So we're talking about family, but we're talking about you. And how do you create a culture around you that reflects the needs inside of you? And how do you perpetuate the things that you want to happen by having discussions with people around you. It's all connected. So, what happens if we don't solve conflict? Why is this such an important conversation? Conflict unresolved becomes powerlessness. I'm going to say that one again. Conflict unresolved becomes powerlessness. When you walk around feeling trapped, that you can't resolve something that really bothers you, you feel powerless. Powerlessness is a crucial factor in mental health. Your mental health is based upon your ability to feel safe and secure and to regulate your emotions. And if you throw powerlessness in there, you immediately destroy that sense of security in your own life. Anything that makes you feel powerless is a big red arrow pointing to something you have to work on. Because the problem with powerlessness is eventually it dissolves into apathy. And apathy is the state of just not caring anymore. And just not caring anymore is one of the very big definitions of depression. When people get apathetic and nothing is worth it or why bother, they go into apathy, they go into depression. And depression's caused by a lot of things, but powerlessness is one of the big ones. People eventually give up. Well, if I can't change it, I'm stuck with it. And I think we've all known people that have marriages like this, or were a part of a family like this, or are like this about their job. And I've had people come to me in session that have been at terrible jobs that make them incredibly unhappy for a decade. And I say, let's change. And they go, why bother? It's just going to be the same somewhere else. Now, when you hear that, I'm sure the first thing you thought was, no, it wouldn't. It can't be that bad. It would probably be better, right? But the messages that we give ourselves are based on our beliefs about the world. And our beliefs about the world are formed and shaped by people around us. So think about the power of that. How much of what you feel every day is because of who's around you? Now, when you grew up in your family of origin, you didn't have a lot to say about that. But now you do. If you're a grown up, which you are, you have a lot more say about what happens around you. But you might have an inherent powerlessness if you grew up that way. I was in a very, very abusive relationship at 17. I ran away from home. And I realized that the only reason that I fell into that was because I was already powerless from the way that I grew up. So now, if I were in a relationship, it would not get abusive. I'm very empowered. I know what my power is, I know what my control is. But at 17, I had been conditioned into powerlessness and being forced to be stuck with whatever I was stuck with. So that powerless mindset took me into a relationship with a person who tried to kill me. But I thought that was all I could do, all I could have. So powerlessness can put you in situations that are very dangerous and make you forget that there's more available to you and that there's more that you can do. So make sure you examine that word in yourself and you see where you feel powerless. There might be things that we are powerless against. We are powerless against our student loans, okay? We're going to have to pay those back or take a consequence, but we shouldn't be powerless in relationships. There's a really good poem I found by someone named Lori Kane, and it's called A Broken Family Tree. And I'd like to read that for you. A Broken Family Tree by Lori Kane. I am one of many small branches of a broken tree, always looking to the ones above for guidance, strength, and security. One little branch trying to keep the others from breaking away. Who will fall and who will stay? Now I stand alone looking at the earth through the rain, and I see the broken branches I knew scattered about me in pain. There are those who have taken an axe to the root of our very foundation, and those who have passed this destruction down to every new generation. If I could take that axe, I'd toss it deep into the sea, never to return again, to harm the generations that follow me. I am one of many, but alone I will go and plant the new seeds, where a beautiful tree will grow. That's everything about generational trauma. That's everything about how we perpetuate the culture of what came before us. And I want you to really consider that there are things in you that keep you from doing the same thing that happened to you. And there are things in you that will perpetuate it. And the difference is not whether you're weak or strong. The difference is your ability to see clearly what you actually believe and what you think is important. And I want you to think about this in your current situation. Are you in a situation where you feel like what you think is important doesn't get to happen? Are you in a situation now where another person holds all the say? When you were growing up, that was okay. Mom and dad were the boss. But now it's you. Even in the context of the family you're in, you still take up space and you still speak up. You still establish what the family culture is. You work on cohesiveness. You create spaces to grow and create what you want. You're painting a picture, and the picture is of your life. And you're painting it alongside somebody else who also has a paintbrush. That's what family is. You're sharing the same view outwards and you're working on it together. How are you doing that? So I want you to think about the idea of powerlessness. Who has the power dynamic in your family? And if you clearly know the answer to that, I want you to think about why. Is the person who makes more money the person that decides what happens? Is the person who's home the person who does everything? There are a million ways that could go. Just make sure it goes in a way that serves you and the person that you're with. I would like you to learn to take that powerlessness, if it's there, and speak out against it, but speak out in a way that is a discussion, not an argument. So if we communicate effectively, we connect. I want to say that one again. If you communicate effectively, you are connecting to another person. If you are active listening, you are connecting. When you feel connected, you feel secure. Security is what we want. That's the key. Healthy families are secure. So there's a book I'm going to recommend today, and it's called The Things I Didn't Say in Therapy by Logan Duane. And I really like this book because it's interesting. It's got these pages with just 3 or 4 lines and then all kinds of open space. And when I first saw this book, I thought there's no content in here. And then I started to realize is that the author would say something very profound and just leave it there. And I thought, okay, how could this book be a tool? And what I like is everything we're talking about here is about how to express your needs, the things you didn't say or you aren't saying. I like this book because you could read that and then you could scribble underneath your thoughts about it and examine if you're saying it, right? It's just a fun little way of journaling or triggering your own thoughts to come out in a way that you're examining what you really feel, what your values are. So the takeaways are nothing is perfect. We have to work on it. Relationships are hard and they are worth it. Whether it's your family, your partner, your kids, your friends, these relationships are the key to a successful life. They are the context in which you exist. You do not live in an iceberg in Antarctica. You live surrounded by people. Let's make sure those relationships are healthy. We need to manage conflict and normalize spaces to connect because the connection is what builds a happy life. So I am so glad you were here for this discussion. I hope that some of it resonated with you and that you're able to take some skills from this and apply them and see how they work and write it down and try again. None of this happens overnight. So, my sunshines, I hope that you are out there spreading sunshine through your family and that you are going to make things better for yourself and inevitably for the other people around you. So take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. Bye.